what I'm doing is just a quick video about storage. Now, for most of you, you're probably not going to need really high speed storage or the amount of storage that you may consider. So this one I'm going to do in two levels. One is your general purpose level of your home user who has a laptop, a workstation or desktop computer and a mobile phone. Now, to do this, you're probably better off with a Synology system as an archive backup, and then it doesn't really make much difference if you don't really care about live data or shared data or anything else about the data, as long as you go for a direct backup to archive. So basically you get a Synology unit and just throw it in the corner, and that will suffice to do most things. Now, if you want to go down that route, as a couple of £100 to spend on a backup solution, then the other option is to buy a USB drive. Now, if you have a modern computer, you'll have a USB 3 port on it or a USB 3.2. Now, this is a really high speed connection, and it's perfectly fine to buy a drive that you can just plug in to your USB port and then back up your data to it, and obviously disconnecting it to protect it from a short circuit, power surge, etc. And that will do fine as just to offload your data, and to get it back on and off is simple as just plugging in your USB device. No configuration required unless you use encryption software. So with that out of the way, let's have a look at our better solution. I'm just literally popping through doing the video here on the editing suite. Now, as you can see, what I've done is I've got a picture here on this front. You can't see it from there, can you? On the thumbnail for this and the start of this video is a Hotswap Bays. Now, these are Hotswap Bays, closed Hotswap Bays. They're not very good, to be honest. The build quality is fantastic, but they just don't cool the drive, so it's a bit of a negative situation. But you can just leave the door slightly open and they'll draw through air. So a Hotswap Bay of that type is literally what you just use to back up and then pull out. So an archiving drive bay, really, rather than a hot swapping bay. So it doesn't really matter what you're going to use case wise. However, I'd probably go away from tower units. Now, tower units are great because you can fit them in behind things stood up, so they got a narrower footprint, whereas they can get knocked over, whereas a desktop one with, you know, the large flat ones aren't going to fall over because they're already fallen over. So what you want to do is really think about, do you need a tower or do you need a desktop? So one's obviously stood up and the other's lying down. That's pretty simple and straightforward. So what you need to do then is, well, what do you actually need? So what you're going to do is, first of all, you need to really pick your hardware and your software. Now, when you get, I've gone through and I've done this Nextcloud. Now, Nextcloud's really simple. Install Ubuntu, and if you get certain versions, it'll automatically have it there for you. So literally, you just click what you want to install. So you install SSH with the Ubuntu installs, and then you might get the option to actually install Nextcloud. So that's the two things. Just literally push the space bar, press enter, fill out the details. You know, next, username and password. Do you want to encrypt? You know, and that's it. But then it will come up, install, run through. If you haven't got the Nextcloud one, you know, literally it's sudo snap install Nextcloud is what you type into the on the keyboard into it, and it will literally come up and install Nextcloud for you. So that's how you install Nextcloud. There's loads of tutorials online that tell you this really ornate, complicated way to do it, but I find that that works perfectly fine. But don't forget to type sudo apt get update apt and then sudo apt upgrade, typing in your password because it'll ask you, and then press enter and then do that, then upgrade, then go sudo apt upgrade again, or just press up 2 or 3 times depending on which order you've done it in, and it will be all installed. Then you just go to a web browser, type the IP address in, which comes up on your screen after you log in, and that will automatically bring you straight into the unpassword admin account. So you can just log straight into it, give it it'll ask you to make a new password, and you do it like that, and it's up and running. There's no there's nothing more to add to it, really. That's literally it. You can add users then from the menu, and it's really simple and straightforward. You know, add a user, add a drive, or whatever you want to do. You can just literally just plug it in and it will work. Now the only caveat to that is that I had done an install, but I'd split the drives up, and I needed to use a software program called Webmin just to go over to the drives, just to initialize the drives, because I find it sometimes quicker and simple to use GUI tools. And Webmin comes and tells me all about the software. Now, if I've also said that Ubuntu you can use, and if you just install Webmin into Ubuntu, you can use its file management software just to dump the files over. There's nothing that actually stops you from doing it, so you can do it that way too. So next up is the Ubuntu. So yeah, you can go in and you can install the SSH, which is essential because that's how you kind of like remote access it, so you don't have to have a mouse and keyboard plugged into it and a monitor and everything else. You just literally do the install. So if you get the option for an FTP install, and there's loads of FTP servers that you can use, and there's Samba server, which you'll find that a lot of the paid for systems use. Samba server, Filezilla, all those kind of things, and they come with apps as well that you can get on your phone. They've been around for decades. They're really good, they work, they do what they're supposed to do. So you can actually do the install that way, or if it's on there you can do it that way or not. You know, it's up to you really. When you do it that way, it's probably going to be a little bit more complicated than Nextcloud, because it really does require some intuition and some knowledge about installing FTP software. But most of it will come already aligned with the packages, so you just type sudo apt-get file server, or you know, something like that, and it's going to work. But yeah, you'd go for something like Samba server when you do an Ubuntu install, and it's really simple and straightforward. Now, Freenas, there is another video I've been doing kind of in the same sort of leg as this video. So I went and done a Freenas install. I burnt it to disk. I have these things still, and optical drives, etc. And what I did is I literally just bang the system together, and it's actually that system that you saw on the front cover, the massive great big tower, and you'll find another video about that tower and the build that I did. So we just literally put everything in there, installed it in, went through next, you know, install, click, password, click, your IP addresses, do you want to do this, that and the other, plugged it in, DCHP'd it in, went back in, went into the web browser and set it up. So I've done some videos about the Freenas, and I will do a separate video for them and just leave it at that, because it wasn't easy. It wasn't intuitive. The setup for user security is threefold and not intuitive. So for most people setting up Freenas and doing these shares, it requires working knowledge basically. So what you do is you have your network, it's obviously installed. You go to pools and have to actually set up pools, which is your drive groups. Then you have to get the user groups and assign those to the drives, then the users to the groups to the drives. Yeah, so as you can see, it's not simple and straightforward, so it's overly complicated, and you need at least 8 gigs of RAM. Now, for some of you who might be buying cheaper motherboards, or going down old tech route to do this, this is kind of a little bit limited. Nextcloud isn't, so that's why I'm going to say probably Nextcloud is probably the way you want to go. Nextcloud or OwnCloud, they're both exactly the same. They were just different forks, because one wanted to go more private and the other one didn't. So for your hardware list, all you need is a computer case with drive bays. That's the essential thing, is where you're going to put the drive. So older towers You can get the ones with they usually come with 4 drive bays, 3.5 inch, so your normal hard drives, and they'll come with sometimes 4 5.5 inch ones, you know, your optical drive size. So if you're going down that route, you probably might want to use one optical drive to load your media on it, because it's the quickest and easiest way to do it. For some, otherwise you'll have to go through USB. And then you can get the Hotswap bays that I've used go into the 5.5 inch bay, so you just use one for the Hotswap bay, and then you can get caddies that fit in there for your other drives anyway, so that's regardless of whether you're using SSDs or the other alternative, which is a hard drive. That's right, yes. So so you can put your hard drives, mechanical hard drives, in the 5.5 inch bays. So make sure that when you buy a case that you can actually do it and it's got enough storage space. Now the more drives, kind of like, the better. My tower unit, and I'll flick some video through, that's a desktop unit. That will hold 19 SSD drives and like 12 standard 3.5 inch drives. So, you know, if I want to upgrade that, that's quite simple and straightforward, although it's like a downtime and it's a bit of a pain in the arse, because it's that whole rail there with the drives, you undo the 4 screws and then the whole rail comes up. So you have to unplug all the drives, take the screws out on the top and bottom, and then put it all back together again. But once it's done, it's all secured in there, and that's a fire rated tower unit as well. So in a fire, everything won't get so crispy in there, and you've got time to lug the big heavy thing, which will probably end up killing you by itself. So, you know, that's the option. There's like the tower unit. Now this tower unit's like a monstrosity, and it doesn't really fit anywhere. It does go under a desk, obviously, and if you've got nothing else, then that's perfectly fine. But that little squat desktop can go either on the desk. We'd probably go down with putting it with my rack server. So, but the problem is that I don't want all my servers in one place, because that's just bad practice. So it's just a matter of horses for courses. So depending on what you want to build and what you can get away with, I mean, I have down on the floor over there a drive caddy. It's not a drive caddy, so to say. The bolting bits for your inside a tower, it's one of those you can just bolt it in, jaw holes, tap them in, and then screw it into another tower to add extra bays. Now these things you can pick up from old computers, and some computers do have them, some don't, but you can order them, I think, as well. So that's another alternative for you. Now, once you just, literally, you're just putting together a motherboard. Now if your motherboard has SATA ports, then that's fine, but that needs to be equal to the drives that you're using. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to end up buying these SATA cards. Now this is a PCI Express SATA one. I can fit 4 internal drives and 2 eSATA ports on the outside, so that gives me a 4 extra drives. Now this one that was shown in red, this is a bit of an old tech, and this is a PCI one, so it fits on the older board's PCI slots, not the PCI Express slots. So if you're buying a newer motherboard, you need to make sure that it has the PCI slots. Now that offers this configuration of the card I'm showing in the B-roll there has a external and internal SATA port. The other ones I've got have got more internal SATA ports. Now if you notice, that big black slot does look like a IDE cable drive, and that's in fact exactly what it is. It's a RAID array for PATA drives. Now PATA, or your old IDE drives, were able to run in RAID, although it never really took off. So, but it's halfway in between of you know, these stopgap technologies that never carried forward. So basically I can put in, if I don't have my motherboard, obviously you daisy chain 2 hard drives to that, and with this card I can daisy chain another 2 drives off it and have them as RAID drives, so it just comes up as one drive. That speeds up the drives, obviously, if you still have some old lingering IDE drives, which are probably I'd be checking the smart data on them and seeing what their runtime hours are, because I should imagine there will be should be soon coming up to quitting time. So, but that is the option. You can buy obviously newer ones than that. Here's exactly, you know, the other card's exactly the prime example, but you know, it just loses you that IDE, which you probably won't need anyway. Comes in handy if you've got a new motherboard with no IDE optical drive, and your optical seems to be out of date somewhat and still running on IDE. That's another alternative for you. So basically, just plug the cards in, plug the drives in, power them all up, and this is where you get your next problem. Your next problem is powering them. Now, you will get power Molinex cables come generally on most power supplies, regardless obviously with the SATA. So you have to make sure that if you've got 14 bays and 14 drives, you want 14 power supplies. This might sound like really basic, but trying to actually work out what you're going to get with a power supply isn't always as simple as you think. So it's worth actually checking just to make sure that you're going to get what you are expecting. Now, if you go down the route of a Molinex connection one, and you've got loads of them and it's just a little bit short, you can buy a dual SATA to Molinex cable. They're not expensive, but they're highly volatile, as in they don't clip together properly. The Molinex connection design is really rubbishy, because it'll only fit together onto a hard substrate like the hard drives, and if they're together, the two Molinex connections, they tend to wobble, and you'll end up with quite a few problems, and it probably will be your power cable. They are unstable. If you do use them, do take them and run tape all the way past from the cables all the way up, well, not all the way up, but you know, like an inch past the cable connection, across the connection and onto the other side, and this will stabilize them and then lower your risk of a fire. And yes, they have been known to catch fire, so if you can get the right connections, get the right connections. So all you're doing is you're just literally putting it together. The processors aren't really that important. RAM is probably really important. Now, the reason is this: RAM, even if you're using DDR2, is faster than the hard drives, and you're only writing to the hard drives and back to the hard drives and then pumping it across your network. So DDR3 200, which is 400 megahertz, is in the region of a 2 gig network connection. If you get to DDR3, you're up to 12 then, so that will give you enough speed for 10 gigabyte networks, because its drive speed, your drive speed then will slow you down unless you're using SSDs and RAID arrays. And it gets a little bit more complicated with how RAID arrays work with data throughput over the RAM and processor to your network, because what you don't want is a bottleneck in that system, because it really does slow everything down once you do get one. But you want a double network capacity to the user. So if you've got 2 or 3 users and they're using the drive, then you'll need to double up. So you don't want, you know, it's like the old adage of a complaint that I read. It was hilarious. Someone was complaining that their 100 megabit connection wasn't going 1000 bit across their network, but everyone else could. Well, for a start, it works in this way. If you've got a network card, and I have a loader over there, if you've got a network port and your input output to your internet is a gig on this one port, if you have 10 ports on there and they're 100, that equals up to the 10. So obviously that load balances, so you can't overload this internet port. That's perfectly fine, that's well established. So you have to do exactly the same, but with each principal point of your network and then the internals. It will always be as slow as the slowest drive, the slowest network card, and everything that's slow in that chain. That one thing will drag the whole lot down, so it's worth checking just to make sure. So on that list I put network card as well. Now if you've got Realtek network, they don't run efficiently or effectively as well as other ones, so you might want to invest in a proper dedicated network card if you're using onboard network LAN. So literally put it together, pop your drive in, you know, pop all the drives in, connect them all up, go into your BIOS, make sure they're all showing up on your BIOS, boot your disk drive, job's a good one, you know, follow the instructions and there you go. No more, nothing else is left to do really. Just put your password in and click next loads of times. So yeah, I've done it on a desktop system. I mean, I showed an old motherboard which was running it perfectly fine, had no issues at all. We had full speed on this old board. And this is my old P5Q board with a quad-core Intel Q6600. Now these 6600 processors are, you know, like £8. The motherboards, you can't, they're a bit odd whether you'll get a good motherboard used. Because they can, if they're not well treated and looked after, then they can be dead boards. So it's always worth checking to make sure the boards actually work before you buy them and commit to them. Once you've got your board in there, don't forget this is a DDR2 board, so ideally try and get a DDR3 board, not a 2. If you go into a 3 board, you're okay. When you go down to the DDR2 board, you're kind of like getting down to, you know, minimum specs. So this is obviously, I've used these before as always on systems and never really had a problem with them, apart from the Asus cooling fan which they'd put on to here or here, one or the other, was so rubbish that it actually melted. So that had to have an upgrade, and I have the hardware to upgrade these problems. But, you know, this is the issue that you're going to find is, well, do you put the money into a new system? Now, the tower that I did build, that has a newer P67 or 76 chipset in there, and it's running an i5 quad-core at up to 3 GHz. Now, I use probably about 8% of that, so, you know, it's not really a massive, great big booster of requirements or whatever, so you're quite able to run a you know, a sort of, that's 11-year-old technology there, that's 14-year-old technology, and you can still run your network storage. What I'll be doing in the next video is stepping it up a grade or 5. In the next video I'm going to be doing a storage array config. This is kind of like your upper tier SAN type network rather than your NAS type. So NAS type and SAN type are a bit different, and that will be another video that I'll do, which is something to do with DAS. So if you want to look at DAS networks as your next search on YouTube, then type in DAS storage networks and then also type SAN storage networks, and you will learn all about them from the thousands of videos from industry experts, and I'm sure they have better facilities to do better videos for you. However, a SAN network is probably the best route to go down, especially for people who have more than one user or more than 3 users or more than 4 users, and definitely anyone that has 5 or more users to the network will need to think about SAN. Now, SAN is a separate network for storage. It's called a storage area network, not network attached storage, and that runs all by itself. So your storage network is its own network, separate to your compute network, and this is important for security. It makes backup easier and data management easier. It is a little bit more complicated because there is 2 or 3 more steps within networking, but we're also going to be starting to look at fiber networks and how to do your fiber networking. Now,